Egypt's pyramids. The greatest of these monuments was the tallest structure on Earth for over 4,000 years. They contain gigantic stone blocks weighing up to 70 tons. Yet they were made by a society that didn't even possess the wheel. Now, Egyptian pyramids on Modern Marvels. Inside the famous Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza, a series of mysterious passageways lead through the mountain of stone. Passing through a magnificent grand gallery, the main passageway finally ends at a granite-lined vault, deep within the massive structure. Called the King's Chamber, many scholars believe that this is where the great Khufu was finally laid to rest. But was he? For centuries, these extraordinary edifices have inspired an enduring fascination in people around the world. Generations have wanted to see them, study them, and unlock their age-old secrets, such as why and exactly how they were built. And yet, despite the best efforts of researchers, the solutions to many questions surrounding the pyramids remain tantalizingly obscure. The lack of concrete evidence from ancient Egyptian sites has complicated the problem. Even the application of the most modern technology has failed to unravel all the mysteries. Recently, however, new theories have been proposed which call some of the key generally accepted ideas about the pyramids into question, and that may indeed solve some of the riddles concerning these magnificent achievements. One of the first mysteries about the pyramids is their exact number. Nearly 100 have been discovered in Egypt. Surprisingly, however, at least 3 pyramids that are mentioned in inscriptions remain obscured by time and the relentless desert sands.
It may seem surprising that pyramids have not been located yet, but over thousands of years, their superstructures may have been quarried away and all that's left is underground or may have been built over.
Built during a span of almost 1,000 years, from approximately 2630 to 1640 BC, the pyramids stand as cultural and engineering marvels of staggering proportions.
Not only are they incredibly magnificent structures, but of course are also the few wonders of the ancient world to survive.
The purpose of the pyramid is to serve as the king's tomb, but that's only the beginning because we have to understand why the king of Egypt needed to have a tomb quite like that. The pyramid is the architectural realization of the king's ascent to the sun. That was the king's after-death fate. The pyramid is the spot in which that great transformation takes place, in which the king is reborn.
An ancient Arab proverb reads, "Man fears time, but time fears the pyramids." And yet the so-called golden age of pyramid building lasted for only 150 years, during the 4th dynasty of the Egyptian Old Kingdom. And the greatest of the pyramids, those on the Giza Plateau near Cairo, were constructed over a span of only 3 generations. Remarkable engineering achievements in their own right, the pyramids were also the centerpieces of often vast complexes of temples and smaller tombs called necropolis.
The word necropolis literally means city of the dead. So with the pyramid itself, we only have the monument over the king's tomb. Attached to the pyramid is a temple. Then there's a long causeway that leads to the valley where there's another temple. Offerings are presented at the statues of the king in this temple. There is enormous staff that's involved for the upkeep of the temple.
The legendary Sphinx, also at Giza, is part of one of these necropolis. That built around the pyramid of King Khufu's son, Khafre. We may know the reason why the pyramids were built, but the origin of their specific shape is still uncertain. The earliest Egyptian burials involved placing the body in a shallow pit, then covering it with a large rock or mound of stones. These not only served to keep jackals from digging up the dead, but also were probably meant to represent the primordial mound from which the Egyptians believed all life sprang.
The ancient Egyptians were oriented towards the Nile, which was the source of their life and their sustenance. And the Nile used to flood every year. After that was over, when the floods would recede, the land would become visible again. So that became a metaphor for creation. So the primeval mound was the first time the first land began to be seen, when the first waters, the primeval waters, had begun to recede. And it was upon this primeval mound that the sun rose for the first time.
Then this mound actually is the pyramid. It represents the primeval mound, that the god created whole Egypt through this mound.
The symbol of this primordial mound was the sacred benben, a pyramidal-shaped stone that most Egyptologists believe would later influence the form of the pyramids.
And in the top of the pyramid, the capstone is a benben. Then the capstone, that they put it in the top of the pyramid, and they cased it with electrum, white gold and yellow gold. And that capstone is a symbol that the pyramid is finished.
But some other scholars cite additional influences for the shape of the pyramids. One Egyptologist has a provocative new theory based on a migration of desert people into the Nile Valley over 5,000 years ago, at exactly the time when pyramids began to be built. According to the theory, the newcomers brought knowledge of the desert landscape with them that might have affected the pyramid's form.
A very important thing in the Western Desert is the fact that the only landforms that persist everywhere are conical or pyramidal landforms. Pointed hills is the main persisting landscape. These are three conical structures in the middle of the desert, some 300 miles west of the Nile. The ancient Egyptians would have seen these things and would have wanted to build their structures that would remain in the windy environment in that form. So these natural landforms can definitely become, in my mind, the precursors to the pyramids.
But before actual pyramids were built, Egyptian tombs went through another stage of development, the mastaba. Mastabas were low trapezoidal structures with sloping sides and flat roofs. Usually made of mud bricks, they developed from the primordial mound burials.
Mastaba, and it's the Arabic word for bench, but they're bigger than any bench. But the mastaba is the word for the superstructure of a private tomb. The Egyptian tomb really consists of two parts. There's the below-ground part, which is the actual burial chamber, and there is the above-ground part, which could be cut into the cliff, or it could be a constructed monument like a mastaba.
With mastabas, the Egyptians had taken the first step towards the classic pyramid. The next stage came around 2630 BC, during the Egyptian Third Dynasty, during the reign of King Djoser, when Djoser's high priest and architect, Imhotep, began building the famous step pyramid at Saqqara.
In Dynasty 3, which is before Dynasty 4, there was a genius architect. His name is Imhotep. And he began to make a revolution in building, changing the building from mud brick to limestone. And he built what's called the step pyramid, a mastaba above the one, until he reached 6 mastabas. And that was a revolution.
Soaring to almost 200 feet in height, with a base measuring 397 by 358 feet, the step pyramid is thought by many scholars to be the first large building in human history made completely of stone, and the first pyramid of any kind built in Egypt. Imhotep remains one of the few overseers of a pyramid whose name is still known. Exactly how he designed and planned the structure is not.
We have from later times a papyrus where they planned a temple, and they knew in advance how many people they would need, how many food they would have to bring to the place, and how many stones would be needed. And so there must have been similar papers for all these pyramids, but unfortunately we don't have them.
However, we do know how the workmen actually accomplished the construction.
To move the stone, they used levers, wedges, and rope, usually pulled by teams of men, chanting, heaving at a 1, 2, 3 heave sort of thing. To cut the stone, they used copper chisels, which are softer than modern iron chisels, but limestone is a soft stone. Of course, it takes a lot of work, but they had the manpower to do it.
The result is a monument that is as precise as it is imposing, Despite the remarkable symmetry of the final structure, however, archaeological investigations have proven that Imhotep did not plan for the monument to be a step pyramid from the beginning.
He started with a mastaba, then he built a larger mastaba, and then he started piling them one on top of the other, so you have as though you have a stairway to heaven.
Why the step pyramid was enlarged in these stages remains unknown. As magnificent an edifice as the step pyramid was, few later pharaohs copied it. Instead, they soon moved on to a new form, one that provided new challenges to their builders, and that would change the shape of the pyramids forever. Just over a half-century after King Djoser built the step pyramid in 2630 BC, King Snefru came to the throne of Egypt. He would become the greatest pyramid builder in Egyptian history. Unsatisfied with his early efforts, Snefru erected no less than 3 huge pyramids during a reign that may have lasted up to 50 years. The first was the so-called collapsed pyramid at Meidum, begun around 2575 BC. During its building, Snefru decided to change the form of the collapsed pyramid several times. Why he did so remains unknown. How he did it is understood much more completely.
It was built as a step pyramid originally, which was then increased in size. Then King Snefru, the inventor of the true pyramid, decided to change it into 4 smooth sides that met at a point high in the sky. And for me, that was the most amazing feat that I've seen in my studies. Because if you deviate the angle of one side, even a little bit on the bottom, it will be exaggerated as you rise to the top. And they never meet. You never get to the pyramidion, to the apex.
Today, all that is visible of this pyramid is part of its inner stepped core, surrounded by heaps of loose rubble, thus giving it its collapsed appearance. In earlier times, archaeologists believed that it had indeed collapsed during construction, and was for this reason abandoned. But later research indicates that the pyramid was successfully completed, then was systematically stripped of its casing.
Over the ages, that exterior was quarried, used for other buildings. Whole cities could be built from the stone that had been gathered there for the pyramids, and that accounts for its present appearance.
Like the step pyramid completed 55 years earlier, the core of the collapsed pyramid was made with layers of stone that actually leaned inward.
The step pyramid of Meidum was built with what was called accretion layers. They are layers of stone that are built circumferentially around a core, and they lean in, actually.
One thing that is known for certain is that at some point during its construction, the collapsed pyramid was temporarily abandoned.
For reason that we do not know, in year 17, he left this pyramid completely unfinished. And he built in Dahshur the pyramid that we call it now the Bent Pyramid. The Bent Pyramid is really constructed. They started 54 degrees and they could not continue. They had to switch the angle.
The Bent was the first pyramid designed from the beginning to be a true smooth-sided pyramid. Part of the reason it still looks that way is because, unlike almost all the other pyramids, most of its exterior casing stones remain in place. With a base measuring 617 feet square and a height of 345 feet, the Bent Pyramid is considerably larger than both the collapsed pyramid and the step pyramid. However, soon after construction began, problems appeared, problems that are still visible in the structure today.
They built up a ways and discovered that cracks were beginning to form, internally and externally. So about halfway up, they changed the angle of the rise of the sides. The problem was the pyramid was built on a clay subsoil. It couldn't support the weight of the pyramid, and that was the reason for the cracking, but they didn't know it at the time.
The method of laying the masonry on the upper portion of the pyramid was also modified. Instead of the earlier technique of the stones leaning inward to match the angle of the outer slope, the later courses were assembled in nearly horizontal layers. This was not only easier to accomplish for the workers and masons who built the pyramid, but also made the structure far more stable. With these engineering lessons learned, Snefru then undertook the building of a brand new pyramid, one that is still hailed as among the most beautiful and perfect pyramids ever constructed, the Red Pyramid.
They went just 1 kilometer to the north and built this massive stone building behind us, which is called the Red Pyramid, because of its appearance, which is better to be seen in the morning light when all these stones really have a red touch.
With a base 772 feet square and a height of 345 feet, the Red Pyramid is more massive but no taller than the Bent Pyramid. With an angle of approximately 43 degrees, the slope of the Red Pyramid is also much shallower than the lower portion of its bent cousin.
The angle was an attempt to copy the upper angle of the Bent Pyramid because they felt that that was the safest angle to build a pyramid with.
But structurally, the Red Pyramid's most important feature was the way in which its stones were assembled.
The Red Pyramid was an advance over the earlier pyramids because the entire pyramid was built with courses of horizontal stone, much more stable structure. All the forces are directly down instead of angled outwardly.
The Red Pyramid of Snefru is the first pyramid that is actually a perfect pyramid, that has achieved the pure abstract pyramidal form.
No one knows exactly why Snefru built this edifice, but archaeologists have speculated that he wanted his final resting place to be an ideal expression of the pyramid, and the Red Pyramid is certainly that. With the construction of the Red Pyramid, all the major engineering and structural elements of the classic pyramid were put in place. The stage was set for Snefru's son, Khufu, to build the greatest pyramid of them all. Near the modern city of Cairo lies the largest and most imposing concentration of pyramids in the world, those of the Giza Plateau. They include the biggest of them all, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, begun around 2551 BC, the Pyramid of Khufu's son, Khafre, the Pyramid of Khufu's grandson, Menkaure, several smaller pyramids called Queen's Pyramids, and the legendary Sphinx. The site of Giza was uniquely suited for the construction of pyramids.
It has the best quality of limestone. It's about 300 feet above the sea level. It's a perfect place. It has the best quality of the stones. And this type of stones never existed anyplace else.
Giza was also less than a mile from the banks of the Nile, making the movement of manpower and supplies to the site far easier.
The Nile was the great artery of ancient Egypt. There were no roads per se, so the river was instrumental. Stone was shipped over the river in barges, not only limestone from one side of the river to the other side of the river, but granite, which came from hundreds of miles away to the south.
Before construction of the Great Pyramid could begin, its builders had to find a way to make the site completely flat. Many Egyptologists believe that water was used. First, a shallow channel was dug around the site, then it was filled with water. Since the surface of the water would be exactly the same height in every part of the channel, the Egyptians only had to flatten the dry portions down to the level of the water. But not everyone agrees that this is how the site for the Great Pyramid was leveled. Martin Eisler is a sculptor who has studied Egyptian construction techniques for over 30 years. He has several provocative theories about the building of the pyramids, which are supported by decades of painstaking research and observation.
I do not think that the Great Pyramid was leveled by means of water in any form. I think they did it with no more complicated a device than this instrument called a square level. It's actually an A-frame, as you can see, with two legs and a plumb bob hanging from its apex. There's a mark in the center that tells when the object is level. You level a small area with this and erect two posts, perhaps 7 feet apart. You mount a board on the post. You could take another post of equal height to the first two and place it at a distance. Using the board as a sighting rod, You could then cut drafts in the bedrock until the pole is at a level with the first two poles in the small area that you've cut. Let's call it the leveling area.
This process could then be repeated until the entire base of the pyramid was leveled. Yet while experts may disagree on the methods used to level the Great Pyramid, they all agree that the results were remarkable.
They did an astonishing job on leveling the Great Pyramid. It deviates by less than an inch from the northern corner to the southern corner, which is a fantastic accomplishment.
The next stage was laying out the base. This was important because the orientation of the pyramid was crucial for religious reasons.
You often read about how closely the pyramids are aligned to the cardinal points, north, south, east, and west. Because just as the pyramid points heavenward towards the sky is also anchored in the earth by the pyramids, because the Egyptians associated the cardinal points with the circuit of the sun, with the sky, and with various constellations.
The generally accepted theory is that the pyramids were oriented using stellar observations. By bisecting the angle between the points where a particular star rises and sets on the horizon, a direction of true north can be obtained. But other experts, including Martin Eisler, believe that a different method was used instead.
It's very hard to point to a distant star and get the accuracy that they were able to achieve. I think they oriented the pyramids by means of the shadows cast by the sun.
First, the builders would have placed a perpendicular stake, called a gnomon, in the ground.
When equal and opposite angles of the sun cast shadows over a gnomon, the bisection of that angle gives you a north-south direction.
Whatever the method, the Great Pyramid was aligned almost perfectly, its sides having a variance of less than 1/15 of 1 degree from the cardinal points. Other measurements were equally precise, each side measuring 756 feet, with a discrepancy of only 4 inches per side. In order to actually construct this gigantic edifice, the Egyptians faced an equally gigantic problem in human resources management. Contrary to the popular image, labor was not performed by hundreds of thousands of slaves, but by peasant conscripts as part of a corvée, that is, as labor owed the state by the peasants, probably as part of their taxes.
People are taken from the farms from all over Egypt. They are brought to a centralized spot, let's say Giza. They work together in organized gangs, directed by experienced masons and architects to build this Great Pyramid, which becomes a symbol of national identity.
The workforce lived and died in its own workers' city, right at the site, which was only discovered and excavated in the early 1990s.
Based on the evidence of our discovery of the size of the workmen camp, we believe only 20,000 workmen were actually involved in the construction of the pyramid. We believe that there was permanent workmen, and this could be like 6,000. Those are actually the workmen who make statues, making technical work, draftsmen, craftsmen, and things like this. But the workmen who move the stones could be 15,000. And they work in rotation. They change them every 3 months.
These workers were further divided into smaller units called crews.
A crew consists of 2,000 workmen. And they divide the crew, the 2,000, to 2 gangs. Each gang consists of 1,000 workmen. Each gang had a name, like Friends of Khufu. And each gang had an overseer. They divide each gang to 5 file. A file is a Greek word, means tribe, group. Each group consists of 200 workmen, and they had names like Great Ones, Green Ones, and after that they divide them to small units, 10 to 12 workmen.
Near the workers' quarters, their graveyard has also been discovered. One of the overseers' tombs was even made in the form of a small pyramid, complete with an underground passageway and burial chamber. The overseers lived a relatively long life, but the common laborers who died at the site did so at significantly younger ages.
all the age of the workmen were between 30 to 35 years old. But the artisans, their ages were between 40 to 45. And this gives us an idea about the levels of the workers' community. The artisans were not carrying stones, were not pulling up stones, they just carving, and it was a light work. But these people who were buried down, they worked in hard work in constructing the pyramids.
The workers were kept supplied by a small army of merchants and tradesmen who transported their goods to Giza by boat.
Also, in order to feed them, farms have to be established, new areas of land have to be cultivated in order to do this. There has to be a means of taking the products, the food, and getting them to Giza and storing them there and redistributing them.
But immense projects such as the Great Pyramid had far larger effects than simply building a monument for a dead king.
In some ways, you can say that the Great Pyramid building projects built the Egyptian state because an enormous amount of organization was involved.
It was their space program. It was the Apollo program of the past, where get all of these people to work together so they can feel great and they can have an accomplishment. And they did, and it became one country since then.
It would be this workforce that would complete the largest engineering project yet undertaken in human history. The workers who quarried the majority of the building stones for the pyramids at Giza labored at a site that has only recently been cleared of debris.
Actually, all the stones for building the Great Pyramid came from a location of a quarry next door to the Great Pyramid, about 600 feet from the base of the pyramid. And we discovered this location.
There's a grid pattern in the ground from which blocks were removed. There were trenches built in grids. They dig down the trenches, which were about 2 feet wide, and then they'd split a layer of stone off. And they did this layer by layer so that there's a bluff above the pyramid now that must be 20, 25 feet high.
Workers used simple copper tools, like these preserved in the Cairo Museum, to rough out the limestone blocks. Afterwards, using tools much like these, masons smoothed the sides and edges of the blocks. Then, employing wooden sleds and ropes such as this, the blocks were dragged to the pyramid. Most scholars believe that the workers piled up the blocks in sequential horizontal layers, with each layer being precisely squared and leveled until the top of the pyramid was reached. But again, not all the experts agree.
Number one, the slightest imperfection on the bottom would assume a cumulative effect as it reached the top. In addition, when I looked at the Great Pyramid, I could see that almost none of the courses were truly level. And I realized then that this was not the way to go. There had to be another approach. And this is what I devoted many years to finding.
Using the collapsed pyramid as a prototype, Eisler proposes that most pyramids built after the collapsed pyramid consist of 3 stages of construction. First, an inner stepped core, not unlike the core of the collapsed pyramid, was built. Then, the base was enlarged, and the large steps were progressively filled in with a second layer of smaller steps, creating a shape much closer to a true pyramid. Finally, the small stepped exterior was encased in a layer of finely finished limestone, creating a true smooth-sided pyramid. Because so much of the original stone remains on the Great Pyramid, it is impossible to tell if this 3-stage process was used in its construction. But as evidence for his theory, Eisler points to a number of smaller pyramids, called Queen's Pyramids, that stand alongside the large pyramids at Giza, and which were built at about the same time.
And the remains there show a nucleus of large steps, which were then filled in with what we call packing stones, which are smaller stones and brought it to a more pyramidal shape. And finally, this whole thing was encased with a mantle of smooth limestone that met at a point in the top.
There are also several theories concerning how the stones were raised to the height of the upper courses. Most of them involve the construction of ramps that either spiraled around the pyramid as it grew, or led directly to the current level of construction.
The ramp that the Egyptian used to construct the pyramid was huge, constructed of stone rubble and mud. Then when the Egyptian will dismantle this ramp, they had to leave evidence under the ground of that ramp. I did excavate on the south side, and the surprise was discovering a small section of the ramp.
But some experts, including Martin Eisler, believe that if a large ramp was employed, its remains would be far more evident.
You can't erase a ramp that may have reached a height of 500 feet. The remains would be obvious by aerial photography.
Mr. Eisler does think ramps were used, but only on the lower, more easily accessible levels of a pyramid. For the higher stages, he believes another method was employed.
I believe they got the stones up the pyramid by putting a slideway of planks along the side and pulling the stone by a crew of men who are located up the pyramid and snubbing the rope around a log which is further up the pyramid. The whole process can be aided considerably by using levers as the stone is elevated, so that with the aid of levers and with the aid of crews of men standing uphill, I believe they could pull the stones into position.
Indeed, at many pyramids, notches in the building stones which may have been used for the placement of levers are still visible. Though controversial, the idea of pulling and levering the stones into place does address the shortcomings of the various ramp theories, but as of yet, no one knows for certain exactly how the ancient Egyptians, a society that didn't even possess the wheel, accomplished this remarkable feat of engineering. Once all the blocks were in place, the Great Pyramid was capped with a triangular piece of granite, meant to represent the sacred Ben-Men stone, symbol of the primordial mound, much like this one which was found at Giza, which may have been coated with a hammered-on layer of gold. Then, using the same methods that were employed to raise and place the other stones, the body of the pyramid was covered with a casing of fine white limestone. Shimmering in the desert sun, the final appearance of the pyramid must have been spectacular, giving those who worked on it an immense sense of pride. Its final height was 481 feet, making it the tallest structure in the world until the Cologne Cathedral of Germany topped it in 1880. The pyramid contains an estimated 2.3 million blocks of stone, each weighing up to 2.5 tons. Many archaeologists believe that the entire process took almost 23 years. As impressive as the exterior of the Great Pyramid is, its interior is equally remarkable. As in the case of all earlier pyramids, there are a series of tunnels and chambers.
The interior arrangements of the Pyramid of Khufu are elaborate. There are 3 burial chambers, and it is not agreed today whether there are supposed to be 3, it was intended from the beginning, or whether they were revising their plans.
Because of these multiple chambers, and the fact that the pyramid was looted of its contents long ago, no one knows for certain exactly where Khufu was buried. But what is believed to be the true burial chamber of the king is reached by a long passageway, which then turns into an immense ascending gallery, the so-called Grand Gallery, a corbelled passageway nearly 150 feet long and 26 feet high.
Corbelled means that the headers or short ends of the blocks get successively closer and closer and closer, so you're looking at a sort of inverse stairway, which finally comes together way up in the distance on high.
Finally, the Grand Gallery leads to the heart of the Great Pyramid. Because this chamber is the only one of the 3 within the pyramid that contains a sarcophagus, most scholars believe that this is where King Khufu was actually buried.
It is lined entirely with granite. That's a wonderful thing. Granite being a stone that was charged with solar associations because it's red for one reason.
30 feet by 15 feet and nearly 18 feet high, the roof of the king's chamber consists of several massive granite slabs, each weighing more than 70 tons. Above this, there are also a series of false roofs that were designed to reduce the enormous weight pressing down on the chamber from above. They have worked brilliantly for over 40 centuries. Khufu had willed the construction of the greatest engineering marvel of the ancient world. However, the completion of the Great Pyramid didn't end the building on the Giza Plateau. Indeed, it was only the beginning. The second large pyramid on the Giza Plateau was built by Khufu's son, King Khafre. Begun around 2520 BC, it was constructed using the same basic methods as those employed on the Great Pyramid. Its base is 705 feet on each side, and it rises to a height of 471 feet, only 10 feet shorter than the Great Pyramid. But because it is built on ground that is 33 feet higher than the Great Pyramid, it appears to be even taller. Due to its smaller base, it also rises at a sharper angle than the Great Pyramid, over 53 degrees to the Great Pyramid's 51 degrees.
And another reason it looks different is that at the very top of it, we have the original fine casing stones that have been left there. So it has a very different profile.
The inside of Khafre's pyramid is different as well. Unlike the Great Pyramid's complex system of tunnels, shafts, and chambers, Khafre's pyramid has a relatively simple internal plan, consisting of two passageways that converge on a single burial chamber.
The colossal statue behind me represents my Serenus, or Menkaure, who built the third pyramid and pyramid complex at the Giza necropolis.
With a base of 335 by 343 feet, Menkaure's pyramid rises to a height of 213 feet, at an angle of slightly more than 51 degrees, making it considerably smaller than Khafre's pyramid. It also has a building mass less than 1/10 that of the Great Pyramid.
But it only looks small when you compare it with those, because the pyramid of Menkaure is huge. It's as big as the step pyramid. The pyramid has the distinction of being clad in its bottommost courses of granite rather than limestone, so it would have been more colorful.
Why the pyramids at Giza got progressively smaller remains unknown, but scholars speculate that the enormous cost of these massive building projects simply could not be sustained by the kings who followed Khufu. Of all the monuments connected to the pyramids, perhaps none is as remarkable as the mighty Sphinx. A huge stone lion with the head of a man, its design, construction, and purpose has been the source of heated controversy for centuries.
The Sphinx, I think, is compelling because it's this part human, part animal form, and it provides this mysterious air. It's not quite completely all there. It's this huge structure on the Giza Plateau. What in the world could it have been about?
We know that from where it is, that most likely it was done during the time of the builder of the second pyramid, King Khafra. And this is because of the orientation of the Sphinx itself. And some people even perceive that the face of the Sphinx itself looks like the statue of King Khafra.
240 feet long and 66 feet tall, the Sphinx was the first truly colossal piece of sculpture in ancient Egypt. Its builders began by quarrying a U-shaped ditch out of a solid limestone base of the Giza Plateau. Then, they sculpted the body from the block of stone that made up the center of the U, making the bulk of the monument actually part of the plateau itself. A recent theory makes an even more direct link between the Sphinx and the natural landscape.
I really think if you look at the setting of the Sphinx, you can see that it is more part of that environment than most people give it. Why do I say that? It's because we see things like that almost identical to it in the Western Desert, due to total natural erosion.
These natural features are called mud lions.
This here is a yardang, or a mud lion, or a natural sphinx. There are huge numbers of these in the Western Desert in Egypt, and that's why I'm saying that the ancient Egyptians may have borrowed that shape from this natural landform, knowing that it is part of the majesty of the land.
For hundreds of years, there have been rumors of secret tunnels and chambers within the Sphinx. Not long ago, those ideas were put to the test with ground-penetrating radar.
And they did survey the whole area, and it proved that there is nothing really underneath the Sphinx. The Sphinx is a solid rock or a living rock, and there is nothing really is hidden inside.
A sense of how ancient and revered this monument is can be gained from the fact that its first restoration was undertaken almost 1,100 years after Khafre died. by Pharaoh Thutmose IV in and around 1400 BC. A 12-foot-tall, 15-ton granite stele erected by Thutmose at the site relates the story of how, as a young prince, but not the crown prince, he was on a hunting expedition near the Sphinx. Pausing for a rest, he fell asleep in the shadow of the statue's head, which was then the only part of the monument that remained above the encroaching desert sands.
And the Sphinx came to him in his dream and said, "My son Thutmose, I'm dying because of the sand. If you remove the sand away from my head, I will make you the king of Egypt." And this prince actually became the king of Egypt. Then Thutmose, as a matter of fact, is the first archaeologist on earth. And he's the first one who restored the Sphinx.
The Sphinx was built to guard the pyramids for all eternity. And yet, as imposing as it has failed to ward off the predations of man. Because of the fabulous riches contained within the pyramids, all of them, without exception, were broken into and looted by tomb robbers long ago. Indeed, in many cases, later archaeologists were able to find the interior passageways of a pyramid simply by following the tunnels dug by thieves, such as this one in Menkare's tomb at Giza. Some have speculated that this is the reason why the building of large pyramids declined so rapidly after the golden age of the 4th dynasty. Others take a different view.
I personally believe that they stopped doing the pyramids because the country was unified. Because if we agree to this premise that Khufu had actually gotten these people to feel great about building this together and becoming one people, then from there on it became a matter of burial site, and that's no big deal. So I started making little ones.
The attention shifted from the size of the pyramid to the development of the complexes attached to the pyramid, so that the pyramid temples expanded and became more complicated, and the valley temples expanded and became more complicated.
After that, pyramids got increasingly smaller, and it just sort of faded out.
Ironically, most of these later pyramids, such as the Black Pyramid at Dashur, were made with a core of mud bricks to speed their construction, then faced with a layer of limestone. Once the limestone was plundered for other construction projects, they quickly eroded, leaving them in a greater state of disrepair than the earlier stone pyramids. As long as the pyramids have stood, and as much as they have been studied, new research promises to unravel even more of their ancient riddles.
New techniques of analysis and investigation are developed and can be applied, and we find out new things all the time because of that. So that the pyramid field is never exhausted.
Yet, even as new theories are examined and old ones discarded, the pyramids will continue to maintain their compelling allure.
I remember when I first saw the pyramids, it was in fact as a graduate student. I was flying in to do research, and our plane passed over them, and I saw them from the air, and I got to admit, I got teary-eyed.
And I'm sure that we'll know more, because I always say to people that you never know what the sand of Egypt might hide of secrets.
Some secrets of the pyramids may remain locked within their stony embrace until even they succumb to the passage of time. But even as new knowledge sheds light on their ancient mysteries, the Egyptian pyramids will remain as eternal monuments, not only to a bygone era, but to the boundless ambition and ingenuity of humankind.
For centuries, the shame of a nation. Now, a symbol of national pride, this imposing mass of stones and buried bones is a monument to the thin line between vision and paranoia, between industriousness and madness. Now, a wonder of the ancient and the modern world, the Great Wall of China on Modern Marvels. The Great Wall of China became the unofficial symbol of the Chinese nation in 1972, when then President Richard Nixon walked upon it during his tour marking U.S. diplomatic recognition of China.
I think that you would have to conclude that this is a great wall and that it had to be built by a great people.
But the Chinese themselves have not always taken such pride in the Great Wall.
The traditional Chinese view of the wall was that it was a symbol of oppressive government and military weakness and futility. It was a symbol of the suffering of ordinary Chinese people under despotic rule.
It rises where the mountains meet the sea at Shanhai Quan and snakes its way across northern China to the edge of the Gobi Desert, forming the spine of a system of so-called long walls that sprawl over thousands of miles of the Chinese landscape. Estimates of its length range between 1,500 and 4,000 miles, and its grandeur has been widely celebrated in myth and legend. Yet the existence of the Great Wall remained unknown to the Western world for more than 1,500 years. Incredibly, it was never depicted in classical Chinese paintings of the period, nor did Marco Polo mention it in writing about his travels in China in the 13th century. In fact, the Chinese did not even refer to a Great Wall of China until the 20th century, after the captivated West gave it a name.
Beginning of the 20th century, you begin to have the Western idea, which glorifies the wall as a sort of symbol of China. And all of those Western myths are embraced by the Chinese to become part of a new cultural myth for China.
In 1908, author and adventurer William Edgar Gill became the first American to travel the length of the Great Wall. His observations were more enthusiastic than illuminating, and some of his infamous pronouncements have been repeated well into the modern age.
The Great Wall is a symbol of China's golden age. It is 1,700 miles long and the only man-made structure on Earth visible by eye from the moon.
The Great Wall of China cannot be seen from the moon. This myth was widespread at the time of the astronauts' flights, and it's well known in the community of astronauts, of people who've actually been in space, that you cannot see the Great Wall from outer space, but astronauts will tell you that nearly every time they go to speak, someone will ask the question.
Man recently glimpsed the Great Wall from space with highly enhanced thermographic photographs taken by satellite. But other durable myths persist, unlikely to be validated by science.
There were all kinds of calculations in the early 19th century about how you could take all of the stone in the wall and redeploy it around the equator and build walls there, or it would be equivalent to all the houses in England and Scotland. And these are still repeated into the 20th century.
The biggest myth about the Great Wall of China is that there is a Great Wall of China. It is doubtful that the Great Wall ever existed at all as a continuous, homogeneous barrier across northern China. Rather, it is a discontinuous series of walls built at different times by different people for different reasons, joined together, allowed to decay, rebuilt, and extended over a period of some 2,000 years.
Well, I think when people think of the Great Wall, they tend to think of this long, sort of monumental, continuous structure that stretches thousands of miles across the frontier of China. The reality, of course, is quite different, that the wall was built in pieces. Much of it is nothing more than sort of an archaeological midden of fallen down ramparts, and in desert sections of China, much of it's even been buried. So the reality of the wall is not exactly as you see it when you visit Badaling, for instance, outside of Beijing, where it's been perfectly restored.
Well, what we're referring to when we talk about the Great Wall today is usually what remains of the walls that were built by the Ming Dynasty. The ones that they built in the 16th century are quite remarkable. They're solid masonry, climbing up precipitous mountainsides with watchtowers, and it's really very difficult to imagine how they were built and how they were completed.
For all its massive size and solid dimensions, the Great Wall of China remains a mysterious presence. It has never been completely surveyed, and even today no one can be sure of its exact length or route. The history of the Great Wall that has come down to us is a curious mixture of reality and imagination, a little solid information interwoven with vast amounts of myth and tradition, and it is virtually impossible to separate the two. No other civilization seems to have adopted wall building as enthusiastically as the Chinese. The first settlements of Neolithic times were surrounded by barriers of pounded earth. The cornerstone of society was the walled city. Indeed, the Chinese word for city, cheng, also means wall.
China is walls within walls within walls. The Great Wall was the mother of all walls, within which these other concentric circles of walls, right down to the wall around one's private house, which everybody had. Walls are very sort of deeply organic part of Chinese history and culture.
They surrounded their houses and temples with walls and projected their wall consciousness beyond the realm of the mortal world into the kingdom of the gods. The god of walls and moats also had the power over the boundaries between life and death, being appointed to inform the dying of their fates. The Chinese built walls to define their spaces, to keep strangers at a distance and members of the clan within. Some walls may have had ritual significance as well. But ancient China was a hostile realm, and most of the serious walls were probably built for defensive purposes, with nomads raiding from the north and neighboring territories ever alert for signs of weakness. A wall was considered a strategic military necessity. By the end of the 8th century BC, the land that would become China had entered a period of interstate strife that would last for 500 years. It consisted of dozens of feudal states and tiny fiefdoms ruled by warlords, bound loosely to a ruling dynasty whose power was more spiritual and ritualistic than actual. By the middle of the 4th century BC, chivalry and allegiance to the king had given way to self-interest and butchery. It was during this warring states period that the Chinese began building defensive walls in earnest. The state of Qi built a wall along its southern border to keep out the armies of Chu. Chu built a northern barrier to protect themselves against Qin. Yan and Chao built walls to keep out northern barbarians and each other. In all, some 2,800 miles of walls were built along the frontiers of the various fighting states.
At some time, there were about 120 different states. By the time you get to the height of the Warring States period, there are only 7 states left. There has been tremendous destruction of these small independent states throughout China.
Out of the bloodshed and destruction of the Warring States period, the major philosophies of China began to evolve, as learned men tried to figure out what had gone wrong and how to make it right. In the 5th century BC, Confucius stressed the need for strict observation of the rules and conduct of relationships between man and heaven, and deplored the necessity for wars and walls. Another group of thinkers, the Taoists, sought answers in nature and believed everything to be in a constant state of flux between the forces of yin and yang. Therefore, struggle and war were pointless. Had either of these major philosophies become the state philosophy, it is unlikely that the Great Wall would ever have been built. But the state of Qin adopted legalism, a harsh totalitarian system of rules, punishments, and just rewards.
There's a very nice story about the crown keeper and the coat keeper. The king falls asleep one night in front of the fire, and the crown keeper comes in and sees His Majesty is cold, so he puts the cloak on top of the king. The king wakes up and says, "Who put the coat on me?" And the crown keeper says, "I did." And the king immediately executes the crown keeper because that was not his job.
These principles guided the Qin armies in the 3rd century BC, when, according to a Han Dynasty historian, they began moving across the map of China, absorbing the other states as a silkworm devours a mulberry leaf. In 246 BC, a pivotal event of enormous significance occurred. A 13-year-old boy ascended to the throne of Qin. He was to become known as Qin Shi Huangdi, the first sovereign emperor of China. Legend says he flew to the moon on a magic carpet in a dream. Looking down, he saw his kingdom was vulnerable to his enemies, who were many, and at the mercy of invaders from all sides. He roused his advisors from sleep and announced, "I will build a great wall." The original Chinese symbol for the word country depicted a walled enclosure. By 500 BC, the symbol had evolved to include a soldier within the enclosure. Modern marvels will return. In 1974, farmers digging a well uncovered an astonishing archaeological find. A cache of terracotta soldiers, bowmen, chariots, and horses, all life-size, and each one different, as if modeled from life. To date, more than 6,000 figures have been excavated, an entire terracotta army designed to fight the battles of a great king in the next life, or perhaps guard his eternal rest in his realm. Nearby lay the tomb of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi, known as the only first. According to accounts handed down by later dynasties, Qin Shi Huangdi's claim to the throne of Qin was of dubious origin. His mother was an enthralling young dancer and concubine to a prosperous traveling merchant who was as cunning as he was wealthy. While trading at a royal court, the merchant asked her to dance for the young Qin heir. When the princely heir fell in love with her, the merchant gave the concubine to him, never mentioning that she was already pregnant with his own child. The prince died after a short reign, and Qin Shi Huangdi ascended to the throne while still a child. As the boy king matured, he began to show signs of eccentric behavior and paranoia. He banished his mother and ordered his father, the former merchant who had ruled during his boyhood, to commit suicide. He surrounded himself with soothsayers, sorcerers, and necromancers, and shrewd, unscrupulous advisors. Around 234 BC, he sent his army out to complete the conquest of China. His Qin predecessors had begun.
By the Warring States period, you have independent states slugging it out. And finally, only 5 are left, only 4 are left, only 3 are left, and only 1 is left. And in 221 BC, China is unified. When the state of Qin destroys the state of Qi,
the king declared himself first sovereign emperor of a new land he named China after his dynasty, and moved quickly to consolidate his power.
Qin Shi Huangdi really did create an empire where there had not been one before. He built a national road or highway system. He standardized the Chinese script. He unified Chinese currency. He standardized the empire. He made it one big single entity. And coupled with that was this incredible interest in magic and alchemy, and the belief that somehow he could defy all mortal bounds and live forever. He was a megalomaniac.
Qin Shi Huangdi standardized the kingdom's weights and measurements with a system based on the number 6, his magic number. He declared black his mystical color, the official color of all clothing, flags, and pendants of the realm, and elevated his title to that of the only first, thus decreeing that the Qin dynasty would rule forever. Then he decided to build a great wall. No one knows exactly when the notion of building a great wall came into the emperor's mind or why he decided to build it. One legend has it that one of his soothsayers predicted his dynasty would fall at the hands of a northern barbarian tribe. Others relate to dreams, omens, and the emperor's inclination to build prodigious monuments to his own glory whenever possible. We do know that around the time he unified China, Qin Shi Huangdi placed General Meng Tian, an energetic and successful military officer, in charge of building a great wall that would separate the civilized people and fertile lands of China from the barbarians and demons said to inhabit the barren steppes to the north. The wall was to stretch from the Yellow Sea in the east to the Gobi Desert in the west. It was to be 24 feet high in places and wide enough for 8 men to march abreast along its top. The wall was to follow natural features of the land whenever possible, and never to flow in a straight line because demons were believed to travel only in straight lines and were therefore unable to cross crooked lines or turn corners. The construction of the wall varied greatly in technique from place to place, and very little remains of Qin Shi Huangdi's wall to tell us how it was done, though many scholars believe it served as a pattern for future walls built on its foundation. Meng Tian probably began with the towers. Made of brick or stone with a stone or rubble base, they were generally about 40 feet high and 40 feet square at the base, tapering to 30 feet square at the summit. Once the towers were complete, they were joined by a stone curtain, a demon barrier, to keep out invaders and evil spirits. Garrison towers large enough to hold hundreds of troops were stationed the length of 2 arrow shots apart, so that all of the territory in between was covered. The towers protruded from the wall like turrets, so defenders could fire at attackers along the wall's base. It is estimated that the Qin under General Meng constructed several hundred miles of new wall. The rest of the barrier was made up of already existing walls, which were joined and incorporated into its body.
And essentially what he was doing was linking a series of earlier walls which the warring states had already built against the nomads in the north. I would say they absolutely followed the rammed earth technique. It's the only technique they knew. They may have done it bigger, or taller, wider, but it's no different in construction techniques from the Neolithic wall.
In the eastern mountains, dry earth was pounded between 2 wall faces of brick or stone until it was of a sufficient level and solid. Then a layer of brick or stone was laid on top to seal it against rain and make a roadway. Further west, where the land is made of a fine silt called yellow earth or loess, laborers poured the soil mixed with water into wooden frames and rammed it into a solid structure as it dried. On the arid western plain, the wall was built from layers of palm fronds, reeds, and gravel held together with mud, ending at the edges of the great desert, beyond which lay the demon-haunted wilderness known to the Chinese as Kuwai, outside the passes. General Meng built the first Great Wall in less than 10 years, completing it sometime before 210 BC. But already stories had begun to circulate calculating its cost in terms of human suffering and human lives. Massive manpower necessary to build the Great Wall was recruited by forced conscription from the peasantry, supplemented with criminals, captured soldiers, defeated nobles, scholars, and other so-called enemies of the sovereign. It has been said that every 3rd man in the empire was pressed into service, and of every 10 recruited, only 3 returned home. Legend tells that the emperor ordered that any man found taking a nap on the wall should be buried alive in it.
The popular memory of wall building is of peasants being rounded up, being sent off to work, never coming back, dying in some remote wilderness, slaving away. It's an absolutely horrible story, and the legend is that the bodies of workers who died were simply tossed into the middle part of the wall between the masonry where you just had rubble. And this outrage, or this popular feeling, expressed itself in a variety of poems, but perhaps most famously in this legend of Lady Meng.
One of the great stories that kids studied in school in the early first 20 years of communist rule was with a parable of this woman going to find her husband, who Qin Shi Huang had sent to the wall to work as a form of slave labor, and she finds that he's dead and probably buried in the wall, as many people were. So in that sense, the wall was viewed as an artifact of feudal oppression, built by the sweat of ordinary people under the whiplash of this tyrant. Now we find it's exactly the opposite. And the Great Wall has been transformed into this symbol of China's greatness, the longevity of its civilization, and representing a country of great power, history, and consequence.
When construction fell behind schedule, one of his seers told the emperor the wall would never be completed unless 10,000 men were buried alive in it. Feeling he couldn't spare 10,000 workers, Qin Shi Huangdi solved the problem by finding one man whose name included the Chinese character for 10,000 and entombed him in the wall instead. It is estimated that more than 1 million men worked on the wall during its years of construction under deplorable conditions, and there can be no doubt that thousands of them died of exposure, exhaustion, and starvation. Even today, stories persist that their bodies were buried where they fell, interred forever inside the longest cemetery on Earth. Less than a decade had passed since the unification of China. Other vast changes had occurred. Great public works projects, canals, roads, and agricultural programs had been successfully completed. Now, with the Great Wall in place, Qin Shi Huangdi boasted that his empire was invincible. But the Chinese have a saying: when things have reached their peak, they decline. Qin Shi Huangdi, unifier of the Great Wall, was described by a contemporary as having a high-pointed nose, pigeon breast, wolf voice, tiger heart, and a stingy, graceless, cringing character. The Great Wall of China will continue in a moment on Modern Marvels. Even as the Great Wall was under construction, Qin Shi Huangdi descended further into mysticism and madness. In 213 BC, he decided that history should begin with him and ordered that all copies of books of history and classical literature be burned. Any person found to be in possession of such books 30 days after the decree was to be shipped off to do forced labor on the Great Wall or be buried alive. An estimated 460 scholars perished. When the emperor's eldest son and heir disagreed with the policy, he too was exiled to the north to assist General Meng. As he grew older, the emperor's obsession with his own death intensified. Although he made only one recorded visit to survey the construction of his Great Wall, he reportedly made as many as 5 extensive journeys in search of an elixir of immortality. On one such journey in 210 BC, he died at the age of 49, his death possibly hastened by noxious potions containing mercury, arsenic, and sulfur, which he had consumed in his quest for eternal life.
There isn't a great deal about him that you would find to like in the records that have come down to us. He burnt the books, he's supposed to have buried Confucians alive, and so on. It's very hard to find much that would be admirable, but he was a very powerful ruler. And like most rulers in ancient China, he wished to be buried as a king should be buried. And he started work on his tomb some 30 or 40 years before he died. Even before he united China, he had started work on this massive mausoleum.
Excavation continues on the pits of terracotta soldiers, but Qin Shi Huangdi's burial mound is yet to be opened. It is said to be booby-trapped and is believed to contain treasures more magnificent than those recovered from any other tomb, as well as the bodies of the emperor's wives and the architects who planned its design, so they could never give away its secrets.
The first emperor was told by a soothsayer that he was going to be overthrown by Hu, by H-U. And he took this to mean the Hu, which is the Chinese word for the horse nomads, the barbarians. But his dynasty perished at the hands of his second son, Hu Hai.
With the rightful heir still in exile, Hu Hai ascended to the throne of Qin with all of his father's viciousness and guile, but none of his strength and leadership abilities. He imprisoned all his father's advisors, including General Meng Tian, who, after reflection on his misfortunes, took his own life, saying that he deserved to die because he had violated the qi, or energy flow of the earth, by cutting through mountains, rivers, and other natural features when he built the Great Wall. Hu Hai ruled only 4 years before rebel forces deposed him and China was thrown into civil war. the great dynasty that was to last forever had lasted only 15 years, the shortest reign of any dynasty ever to rule China. For all its imposing size and strength, the Great Wall wasn't very effective in stemming the tide of invasions from northern nomads. Known collectively as Tartars, after a medieval name for hell, the Chinese said they were more monsters than men, devouring the flesh of dogs and horses and drinking the blood of their enemies, strong of body, ruthless of heart, and in war, invincible. One of them who was preparing an assault on the Great Wall was a fierce Mongolian leader whose name would become synonymous with terror throughout the empire and the world, Genghis Khan. If the Great Wall were transplanted to the United States, it would run a zigzag course from Philadelphia to Topeka, Kansas. The Great Wall of China will continue in a moment on Modern Marvels. For more than 1,000 years after the death of the first emperor, subsequent dynasties worked on the wall or allowed it to decay according to the military needs and political climate of the times. Some, like the Han Dynasty, kept parts of the wall in repair, added to it, or built their own walls. Others, like the Tang Dynasty, who believed it useless as a defensive barrier and too expensive to maintain, allowed it to fall into ruin. The barbarian onslaughts continued, with most of the successful invaders gradually assimilating into the culture, often becoming more Chinese than the Chinese.
Well, the popular conception of the Great Wall is that it was an enclosure that would keep the barbarians out and protect China from invasion. And that also made it difficult for Chinese to move into areas beyond the Great Wall. It was seen as the boundary between civilization and non-civilization. And the truth of the matter is, the wall was very porous, very easily crossed.
The idea that you can seal off the frontier is not going to work. The nomads will always find a way. They'll find a break in the wall. They will often simply be let in by people who are guarding the wall. And even in the Ming, at the heyday of wall building, they regularly either went around the end of fortifications, came through gates, and they turned up right outside the city walls of Peking.
Legend says Genghis Khan was born clutching a clot of blood in his right fist as a symbol of his bloody future. As a young man, he conquered and united warring Mongol factions and forged a mighty army. And in 1211 AD, the Mongol horde of Genghis Khan swept down upon China like devils loosed out of hell, crossing the Great Wall and spreading across the land like grasshoppers, covering the face of the earth.
This force was able to create the largest empire in the world. I mean, they were unbelievably fierce fighters. And they relied upon, in addition to their martial skills, a psychological terror. When they took the city of Herat, they killed everybody because they wanted to impress all of the people of Central Asia with the fact that if there was any resistance, their opponents would be killed.
The greatest joy a man can have is victory. To conquer one's enemies, to pursue them, to deprive them of their possessions, to reduce their families to tears, to ride on their horses and to make love to their wives and daughters. Genghis Khan.
It took 60 bloody years before the whole of China fell to the Mongols under the leadership of Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan. He declared himself Emperor of China in 1271. The Mongols would rule China for nearly 100 years. China under Mongol rule became a cosmopolitan place because the Mongol Empire opened China to Eurasia and connected it to the trade routes that crossed the land all the way to the Middle East. It was during this time that Marco Polo is said to have gone to China, and it has long been debated as to why he never mentioned the Great Wall in his writings. In fact, it is likely that the Great Wall of China as we know it did not exist during Marco Polo's days at the court of the Khan. During the years of Mongol rule, what remained of the Qin Great Wall had fallen into ruin. The Chinese never accepted Mongol rule, and Kublai Khan was never regarded as anything but a barbarian by the Chinese, no matter how much he impressed Marco Polo and the other visitors. Frequent uprisings by Chinese rebels chipped away at the Mongol occupation until finally, in 1368, a Chinese peasant led an army which drove the last of the Mongols out of China and founded the Ming Dynasty.
The Ming are the most active wall builders in Chinese history. If the Ming had never done their work, there would be no idea of a Great Wall of China, and the fortifications built by other dynasties would be interesting footnotes in historical texts. What we know today as the Great Wall is certainly the Ming Wall. That's what you see if you go to visit the Great Wall of China. And it's very different from any of its predecessors. It's made of masonry in most places. It has crenellations. To build the Ming walls, you had to have specialized groups of masons and stone cutters and whatnot. You had to pay them with money. It's an operation of an entirely different scale and character compared to the earlier ones.
Much of the Ming Wall is built on a foundation of granite blocks as long as 14 feet and 3 or 4 feet thick, all accurately cut and fitted. A facing of handmade bricks up to 5 feet thick was built up on top of these blocks up to 20 feet in height. The center cavity was filled with pounded earth and covered with the same brick, forming a 14-foot wide roadway across the top. The Ming created elaborate gates along points in the wall and crowned the eastern terminus at Shanhaiquan with the first gate under heaven. At the western terminus at Jiayuquan, they built the Jade Gate, or Martial Barrier. The Ming left hundreds of memorials and tablets along the wall extolling the emperor's wisdom and virtues, and providing interesting data about the work they had completed. One name that appears frequently is that of Wan Li, who reigned in the 16th century and made such a contribution to the Great Wall that many Chinese in later centuries thought he was the original builder. The Chinese name for the wall, Wan Li Changcheng, meaning Wall of 10,000 Li, can also be translated as Wan Li's Wall. But as powerful as Wan Li's wall was, it couldn't keep the Mongols from making regular raids into Chinese territory or block the armies of a powerful tribe of hunters from Manchuria who cast covetous eyes on the rich lands to the south.
The Ming obsession with the Great Wall became their psychological defense against the Mongols. It wasn't much of a military defense in itself. Created a kind of Star Wars mentality that somehow they would be able to, at great expense and cost, find a way to hold off the Mongols, who had been expelled from China but never brought under control.
One of the striking things about the Great Wall is it's very expensive to maintain troops there, to supply troops. The estimate is if you send 60 cartloads of grain up to the Great Wall, you have to eat 59 of them to get that one cartload up there. This means that the Chinese tended to establish military colonies at the wall itself, where the soldiers would be farmers too and would feed themselves.
The Chinese who were sent to garrison the area are very unhappy about it, and they're sent there for life. They tend to settle down. So you find that there are plenty of Chinese up there who can speak nomadic languages, and they're on good terms with the Mongols. They trade, they make money. And it doesn't surprise me a bit that if some Mongols want to come through some gate that these people are supposed to be guarding, that, you know, in consideration of a small payment, then they will look the other way.
This system was one of the foibles that led to the downfall of the Ming, because they weren't very good farmers, and the land up there wasn't very good. The system broke down, and the military colonies themselves, by the end of the Ming, began to become barbarian themselves. And it was they that made it possible for 156,000 Manchus to conquer 150 million Chinese.
The Manchurians took Peking in 1644 after the commanding officer at Nankou Pass and many of his troops deserted to join the Manchu. They would rule China into the beginning of the 20th century, when the last Manchu emperor, a child named Pu Yi, was overthrown by a democratic rebellion in 1912.
It was a great source of humiliation that China twice was attacked and conquered by these barbarians from outside the wall, the Mongols and then the Manchus. And then interestingly enough, the name barbarian then got applied to Westerners who suddenly arrived in ships. And of course there was no wall in the ocean. There was an interim where the Great Wall was a forgotten piece of history in a way to Chinese. It had stopped being functional. The fox had gotten into the hen house. It was basically all over.
The Manchu didn't need the Great Wall as a military or national boundary because they ruled the territory on both sides of it. It was designed to turn back barbarians, yet now the barbarians ruled China. The Great Wall of China would not play a significant role in Chinese history again for more than 300 years, until the 20th century, when it would be transformed from an emblem of China's guarded past into a powerful symbol for change. The Manchu were invited through the Great Wall into China to help overthrow rebels who had seized control of Beijing. They succeeded, but then remained to rule as the Qing dynasty for 267 years. Modern marvels will return. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, China had become a fashionable destination for the more adventurous Western tourists, and no trip was complete without an outing to the Great Wall.
When the Westerners first came to China, they were terribly impressed, I think, with the high degree of civilization they saw. The cities were prosperous, lively, the population was immense, the elites were very refined, educated, a wonderful literate tradition going back thousands of years. And I think there was a tendency to glorify many of the achievements of Chinese civilization. And this Great Wall just outside of Beijing was another one of these remarkable achievements.
While Westerners flocked to admire the Great Wall that had captured their imaginations, the Chinese still viewed it as a reminder of feudal oppression and military failure. In desert regions where shelter is hard to come by and building materials scarce, peasants carted away great sections of the wall for use as building materials, and other families had built dwellings inside of the ruin itself.
What's interesting to observe is that when Westerners come and start visiting, the Chinese are just not interested at all. They pay no attention to it, and the Westerners are thrilled, and they get out and start measuring it, sketching it, drawing it. And half of this picture is still true today. That is, when Westerners get there, they still get all excited and start taking pictures. But today, what's fascinating is the Chinese do the same thing.
During the Japanese invasion of China during the 30s and 40s, many of the war's great battles were fought along the Great Wall, and it began to be portrayed as a symbol of popular resistance, particularly among the communists. Mao Zedong himself and many other leaders of the communist movement celebrated the Great Wall in poetry and song. In fact, the song, which is now the national anthem of the People's Republic of China, was written by a communist poet in 1935. Arise, ye who refuse to be slaves. With our very flesh and blood, let us build our new Great Wall. After the Communist Revolution in 1949, there was a brief renaissance for the Great Wall, and restoration work was begun along portions that had been badly damaged in the war. But the communists' regard for the Great Wall of China was to be short-lived.
Mao Zedong was an incredible paradox. He was really sort of deeply, I think, living between being very organically connected to China's past and also having an ideology which was required in the sense that he would be opposed to it. So there was a great contradiction at work at the heart of Chairman Mao. And in a certain sense, the Great Wall lies at the heart of it. It was a symbol of China's unity and greatness. It was also a symbol of its autocracy of its sort of wanton oppression of ordinary people. He never worked this out.
During Chairman Mao's Great Cultural Revolution, many of China's treasures of the past were destroyed. Priceless bronze works of art were melted down for scrap. The magnificent wall surrounding the city of Beijing was torn down and a freeway built in its place. Thousands of ancient structures were demolished to make way for modern construction, and the Great Wall was no exception. Hundreds of miles of the Great Wall were destroyed, often with dynamite and heavy machinery, and the material used for road, reservoir, and building construction. But even as the Great Wall was being plundered, there was a quiet resurgence of respect for traditional Chinese culture and a deepening sense of national identity rooted in Chinese history. Richard Nixon's 1972 visit to the Great Wall marked a symbolic turning point. When China was an empire, protocol dictated that visiting foreign dignitaries go to the palace and pay their respects by bowing down in front of the emperor. Today, there's no longer an emperor, but when official visitors come to China, the traditional ceremony of paying homage to the greatness of the country and to the Chinese people is often carried out with a trip to the Great Wall. The Great Wall in today's China has become a symbol of China's greatness, of the patriotic love of the Chinese people for their homeland, and of China's strength and determination to be respected. When the People's Republic of China joined the United Nations, they presented the organization with this spectacular tapestry of the Great Wall, measuring 32 by 16 feet and weighing 600 pounds, thus declaring the Great Wall the official symbol of the Chinese nation. In 1984, the Chinese government embarked on an active campaign of wall restoration, launched by Premier Deng Xiaoping himself, declaring, "Let us love our country and restore our Great Wall." Since then, more than 200 world leaders and 50 million tourists have visited the Great Wall of China.
It is an extraordinarily powerful tourist destination. In many ways, I mean, the Great Wall has become a kind of a, Disneyland ride. You go there and you can sit on a camel and have your picture taken. You can dress up like Qin Shi Huang. Or you can buy, tote bags. You can buy T-shirts. I visited the Great Wall. Anywhere there's a little niche, somebody has got a product.
The Great Wall's popularity has prompted the Chinese to expand their restoration efforts to sites outside the major tourist area near Beijing, so that crowding and associated wear and tear will not endanger the physical survival of the ruins.
Nobody goes to China without going to the Great Wall. It's pretty spectacular. You rise up onto this wall that doesn't just sort of stretch away like some sort of modern-day construction, but it follows the contours of the hills and the mountains, and it winds. And it is very much like some sort of a serpent that's coiled out across this very wild and uninhabited landscape. And it just sort of takes your breath away. Everybody knows the Great Wall. You don't need to have read a book. You don't need to be very worldly. You think of China, what do you think of? The Great Wall.
The story of the Great Wall of China is one of bloody conflict and human suffering, which emerges ultimately as a tribute to the spirit of a land and a people. And as China integrates itself into the world community and rejects the path of isolation, which the wall so long symbolized, the Great Wall has been transformed into a marvel of persistence and antiquity, imperial splendor, and national pride. Stargazing, humankind's way to predict the future, to talk to the gods, and today to unlock the secrets of creation. Our tools, magnificent machines built by pioneers, pushing the limits of technology, battling personal demons and public ridicule. Now, the great observatories, from Stonehenge to Hubble, on Modern Marvels. The science of modern telescopes is more fantastic than most science fiction. The sights gathered by these machines more spectacular than any imaginary visions. They extend our reach to the farthest corners of the utterly mysterious universe into which we were born. Early man yearned for a link between the mysterious lights in the sky and his daily life, envisioning the animals around him as patterns in the heavens. Thousands of years before Christ, peoples far removed from each other built great stone observatories to chart the cycles of the sun and the moon. From Egypt to the Americas, remains of these star charts dot the globe still. So important were the structures that generations endured back-breaking labor to complete them.
Stonehenge was the pinnacle of what that technology was capable of producing in those times, with something like 20,000 man-years of effort to move these massive blocks from North Wales all the way down to the south of England, distance of several hundred miles. And this was probably without any beasts of burden to pull them. They were probably moved by hand, rolling on logs for that entire distance. So it was a huge effort and represented the best that that technology was capable of doing in terms of astronomical observatories.
For thousands of years, mankind's celestial technology and his knowledge of the stars changed little. Then one fateful day in 1609, Dutch optician Hans Lippershey accidentally peered through two pairs of glasses and realized that the twin lenses magnified objects. The telescope was born. An Italian mathematics professor named Galileo Galilei saw the instrument's military potential, demonstrating to the Senate of Venice that the so-called spyglass allowed incoming ships to be spotted 2 hours earlier than with the naked eye. A grateful Senate immediately doubled Galileo's salary. In 1612, Galileo turned his spyglass skyward and instantly saw 10 times further than any previous human. In time, his pioneering observations would reveal that the Earth rotates around the sun, directly contradicting age-old beliefs that the Earth is the center of the universe. The Catholic Church was not amused. Galileo was brought before the Holy Roman Inquisition to stand trial for heresy. Under threat of torture, he publicly reaffirmed the Church's belief that the Earth is immovable. But as he was led away to what would be house arrest for the rest of his life and eventual blindness caused by staring at the sun, he whispered, "Eppure si muove," but it does move. The year 1868 saw the birth of a man like Galileo who would devote his heart and soul to the advancement of astronomy. George Ellery Hale. As a boy, Hale read Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon and was hooked on astronomy. By age 13, he was working with professional astronomers. Hale's self-appointed mission was to build ever more powerful telescopes, machines of staggering size and exquisite precision that would unveil the secrets of the universe. To accomplish this goal, he would brave a never-ending series of obstacles, including a lifelong struggle with mental illness.
At times, the demons were literally crippling. He would wake up in the night and have a sense of little demons coming and talking to him and telling him his life was worthless and everything he had done was worthless. And much of his life was a battle between these periods of extraordinary clarity, when he was able to do what perhaps no other scientist or organizer of science could do, and periods when he was almost incapacitated by these demons, when he would have to retire to a dark room.
The dawn of the 20th century was an era of competition to build bigger and better machines. Ships, buildings, trains. Engineers raced to create more spectacular versions of each. Hale took advantage of this expansive spirit to raise money for his epic projects. In 1907, he began a decade-long effort to create a telescope with a 100-inch diameter mirror, by far the most ambitious ever attempted. This instrument, if only he could find a way to build it, could hold the answers to ancient questions about the size and age of the universe. Hale took industrialist Andrew Carnegie by the hand, wining and dining him, demonstrating how telescopes work, awing him with the wondrous discoveries to come. The Carnegie Foundation did provide the needed funds, and over the next years, a dome arose atop remote Mount Wilson near Pasadena, California. Chosen for its clear air and distance from man-made lights, Mount Wilson would see workmen converge by the hundreds to transform Hale's dream into a reality of glass and steel. The great observatory was finally finished in 1917. But only the first sighting through the telescope known as first light would reveal whether it worked. On a cold November night, Hale led 20 colleagues across a narrow wooden bridge to the dome. With them was poet Alfred Noyes, on hand to record the historic occasion of first light at the world's mightiest telescope.
Where was the gambler that would stake so much time, patience, treasure on a single throw? All their youth was fuel to the flame of this one work. One in a lifetime to the man of science, there comes this drama. If he fails utterly. Alfred Noyes, Watchers of the Night.
Hale, who had aged from 39 to 49 over the course of the project, was given the honor of first view and turned the telescope on Jupiter. To his horror, not one but several overlapping images filled the eyepiece. The 100-inch mirror appeared fatally flawed, Hale's 10-year obsession an utter failure. But then a colleague recalled that workmen had left the dome open during the day. Perhaps residual heat was distorting the mirror. Hale must wait hours longer for the mirror to cool.
And for those few hours, no one is quite sure whether they have a total dud on their hands or a magnificent new telescope. Hale and Walter Adams don't even sleep until they come back 2.5 hours later, come back in, spin the telescope around to a new target, look in, and sure enough, see perhaps the clearest and most brilliant image anyone had ever seen through a telescope.
Hale had built the 100-inch telescope, but it was the observations of astronomer Edwin Hubble that would make it famous. High school basketball star, Rhodes Scholar, and World War I infantry veteran, Edwin Hubble gave up the study of law for astronomy because, as he said, astronomy matters.
Hubble affected in almost every circumstance a British accent, he wasn't at all British, a pipe, a tweed jacket, and a set of mannerisms that were really, if you want, English common room and sherry sipping. It didn't win him a lot of friends among fellow astronomers.
But no one questioned Hubble's intellect or his determination. Night after grueling night, he guided the 100-inch telescope, exposing single photographs for hours, testing his commitment, his weary eyes, and his bladder control.
And guiding means you have to sit with your eye at an eyepiece, watching a guide star, keep it on a crosshair, constantly throughout the entire exposure. And you're stuck there. And in the winter, you are really stuck because it's very cold at most observatories.
Within a few years, Hubble's photographs answered the great astronomical question of the age, proving that the Milky Way is just one of innumerable galaxies. Our local cluster of stars, long thought to contain the entire universe, was but a small outpost, a drop in the cosmic ocean. And not only was the universe far larger than previously imagined, it was expanding at fantastic speeds. Edwin Hubble had discovered the first clues to solving the ultimate mystery, evidence that all we know or ever will know began in a Big Bang. Hubble's work on the 100-inch telescope had revealed new depths to the universe, but it would take an even mightier observatory to explore those depths. Master builder George Hale stood ready to meet the challenge. In 200 BC, Eratosthenes estimated the circumference of the Earth with over 99% accuracy by measuring the moving shadow cast by a stick in the ground. In the 1920s, George Hale set his sights on creating a machine capable of seeing a candle at 10,000 miles, 10 million times more sensitive than the human eye. Only with a massive 200-inch telescope could scientists explore the vast universe that Hubble had glimpsed. The largest scientific instrument ever built, the 200-inch, would weigh over 500 tons. Not simply a bigger version of earlier observatories, it was instead an entirely new beast, requiring revolutionary advances in a host of technologies. But Hale was 60 years old and in perilous health. Increasingly incapacitated by mental breakdowns, he had no time to lose. He zeroed in on his old friend Wycliffe Rose, a man fond of saying, "Make the peaks higher." Together they persuaded the Rockefeller Foundation to provide $6 million, the biggest grant ever for a scientific project. This was the birth of big science in America, the beginning of a huge nationwide effort to study nature. When Hale announced the project in October 1928, newspapers around the globe went wild with excitement. They immediately dubbed the telescope the Giant Eye and proclaimed it a landmark event in human history.
Standing on the threshold of a vast uncharted space to be penetrated by the 200-inch telescope, the scientific world is frankly a tiptoe with excitement. What, men are asking themselves, will the gigantic new telescope reveal? Los Angeles Times, October 29th, 1928.
And the public enthusiasm that followed was just amazing. It went from a little girl sending $1 that she had saved up from her allowance to people congratulating Hale on, in a sense, reinventing the world, beginning our great age of science and achievement all over again. I think there's probably never been a response quite as enthusiastic and as overwhelming toward an instrument with such a benign purpose.
When Hale predicted that the new telescope could take 7 years to complete, he was called a pessimist. But he knew better than anyone that every stage of the project called for research and engineering never before attempted. Many doubted whether it was even possible to make such an enormous mirror.
Nobody knew you could cast a piece of glass 200 inches in diameter successfully. And of course, without that, there is no telescope. The glass, the 200-inch mirror, is the light collecting part of the telescope and the focusing element of the telescope. And if that doesn't work, nothing works.
Creating a large mirror involves pouring hundreds of buckets of molten glass into a mold. In this case, a 200-inch mold. The resulting disc must be free of bubbles or other imperfections. Corning Glassworks in Corning, New York experimented with a new substance for this mirror, Pyrex glass. In March 1934, journalist Lowell Thomas used his national radio program to inform America that Corning was ready to create the 200-inch mirror.
He heard about this mirror pouring, and in one of his nightly news broadcasts announced in the typical Lowell Thomas hyperbole that this was the single greatest event of the 20th century, and by which he did not mean even to exclude the First World War. And from that moment, the world just turned toward Corning and poured into Corning to see this event. And it became an incredible publicity show. People in the galleries would, during the pouring, be singing, "I'm seeing the world through rose-colored glasses." I mean, it had everything but an orchestra playing during this very delicate operation of trying to pour the largest chunk of glass ever poured.
Only days later would the audience learn that the pour was a failure. Dozens of cores anchoring the disc in a honeycomb pattern had broken loose. Reattachment was impossible. 9 months later, Corning poured another disc, this time without spectators. But casting the mirror was just the first step. To prevent scarring, the 1,500-degree molten mass was cooled by less than 1 degree a day, a process that would take 10 months. After 6 months of controlled cooling, the worst flooding in decades struck Corning. When the Chemung River overflowed its banks, rainwater surged towards the Corning factories. If power was lost, so was the mirror.
The water level slowly rose, and despite all of the efforts and all of the pumping trucks and all of the men of Corning with jackhammers and sandbags, the water literally lapped to the top of the transformer. They got the one transformer they needed to keep the project alive out, really with about a minute to spare. And had that not happened, the mirror would have been lost.
In 1936, the 40,000-pound chunk of glass was shipped west to the Caltech optical shop in Pasadena.
Everywhere it went, the train was literally mobbed by people. There would be towns where the temperature was 20 degrees below zero, and all the schools were let out so the children could line the tracks and see this achievement of American technology go by. This was what we could do. This was achievement. This was the best of America.
Even the Lindbergh baby kidnapping trial was knocked off the nation's front pages by news of the mirror's journey west. George Hale's dream had become a part of American folklore. In April 1936, the great disc arrived in California. As locals rode shotgun down the streets of Pasadena, the mirror was escorted to the Caltech optical lab. In the excitement of the day, no one could have imagined that completion of the telescope still lay more than a decade away. Our distance from nearby stars is found by measuring a star's position at 6-month intervals. Its semi-annual shift or parallax is used to calculate the distance. While the public focused on the giant mirror, Hale and his colleagues turned to the many other challenges of creating an observatory. The dome, the telescope tube, the rotating device, all presented major obstacles. By the mid-1930s, Hale's brainchild occupied thousands of engineers, mechanics, and workmen from coast to coast. Mount Palomar, outside San Diego, was chosen as the site for the observatory. At 5,000 feet above sea level, Palomar is blessed with some of the clearest skies in the northern hemisphere. And appropriate enough, in Indian legend, the mountain served as a departure point for souls journeying to heaven. In Philadelphia, Westinghouse proudly unveiled the 50-foot-long, 150,000-pound tube designed to hold the mirror. This tube would eventually be mounted on a horseshoe bearing weighing 400,000 pounds, the heaviest single unit ever machined. Even when broken down into component pieces, the hardware was too big to ship by land. The giant steel blocks were loaded onto cargo vessels and taken by sea through the Panama Canal and up to California. These and 1,000 other difficulties were conquered by Hale's leadership.
He is, in effect, a one-person network bringing together industry, academia, government, scientists, and forcing them to work together in a way that has never occurred beforehand. Today, we have an agency like NASA or the National Science Foundation that spends all of its time doing exactly that. But George Hale is accomplishing that when there are no support structures, there are no institutions to do it.
The Palomar Dome was the largest welded structure ever built, and every part of it demanded exact precision. The rails upon which it would rotate had to be smooth, within 1,000th of an inch. Anything less would introduce a jitter into the photographed images. Only after 6 months and thousands of man-hours of smoothing were the rails pronounced ready.
The moving parts of the 200-inch telescope go 535 tons. And we talk about tolerances of thousandths of an inch. To see that kind of precision in that size machine is a remarkable combination.
The biggest enterprise in scientific history had grown beyond the longevity of its creators. In 1938, Francis Pease, the original designer of both the 100-inch and the 200-inch telescopes, died from complications of cancer surgery. And George Hale was failing fast. Now confined to a wheelchair, he approached the end with serenity. On February 18, 1938, he was wheeled outside, where he looked up at the sky and said, "It is a beautiful day. The sun is shining, and they are working on Palomar." Just days later, he died at age 69. Hale's colleagues continued to drive the project forward. As ever, the toughest challenge was perfecting the giant mirror. In the Caltech optical shop, 20 technicians operated in the ultimate clean room. If the slightest microscopic speck fell under a polishing brush, the mirror would be scratched, setting the process back months or even years. Marcus Brown, the single man connected with the telescope from origin to completion, protected his mirror with the zeal of a Secret Service agent guarding the president.
Some people thought that Marcus Brown was almost a fanatic in terms of his disc. He would order a cleaning. As soon as they finished the cleaning, he would order them to clean the entire laboratory again. But he had become possessive. He was a man with a calling, and this was his masterpiece. And he ruled his optics shop as a dictator.
Month after month, year after year, the 200-inch disc turned in a never-ending circle, polished with ever finer tools. Over 5 tons of glass were removed at the optical shop. As the 1930s came to a close, the mirror approached its goal, 2/1,000,000th of an inch from optical perfection.
If you want to understand how smoothly polished the glass is, try to imagine scaling that 15-foot mirror up to the size of the United States. If you do that, the highest mountains that the glass would have are something on the order of 6 inches or so. It's an extremely well-polished piece of glass.
In 1940, with the mirror on the verge of completion, the entire project fell victim to the demands of war. Workers and facilities were turned over to the war effort. The precious mirror crated up and put into storage. The noble search for answers to the riddles of the universe would have to pause before the barbarity of mankind. After the war, the mirror was brought out of storage and the task of polishing its surface resumed. Finally, in late 1947, after 11 years and 180,000 man-hours of grinding and polishing, the job was done. The 200-inch mirror was ready for its final journey to the top of Mount Palomar. Bellier Truck Company, who guaranteed to tackle anything from a building to a whale, was entrusted with the priceless cargo. A caravan of trucks escorted by 10 highway patrolmen crawled forward at a maximum 10 miles an hour.
In the early morning hours, this cargo goes by. It's not been announced anywhere. And farmers first wake up and other people wake up and see something go by, and it's not clear what it is even. And then each village it would go through, each juncture on the street, someone would say, "It's the giant eye." There would be a sort of hush because people would have a sense that they would never again see anything quite like this.
The 200-inch telescope had survived a depression, a world war, and the death of its creators. 2 full decades, a human generation had passed between financing and completion. A long time in human terms, but insignificant on an astronomical timescale. On June 3, 1948, with George Hale's widow in attendance, the telescope was officially dedicated.
As this great instrument probes the secrets of the universe, it is fitting that it should stand also in memory of the great scientist who contributed so brilliantly to the science of astronomy, and who served so ably his community and his nation. Dr. Lee DeBridge, dedicating the Hale Telescope.
For 30 years, the Hale Telescope would reign supreme as the finest observatory on Earth. Much of the history of 20th century cosmology and astronomy was written at Palomar. On this mountaintop, man for the first time saw the life and deaths of stars. It was here that the universe was revealed as twice larger than previously imagined. And even today, the telescope contributes daily to its continuing legacy.
The 200-inch telescope and all optical telescopes in the world are always kept at the most critical edge of research capabilities. That was built into them by the people who designed it. It always amazes me how well built the 200-inch telescope is. It was built to last.
The magnificent new machine came too late for the great astronomer Edwin Hubble, who died in 1953. But Hubble's name would endure, inspiring the next great leap in man's quest to know the heavens. Using the Palomar telescope, astronomers have discovered quasars up to 12 billion light-years from Earth.
From our home on Earth, we look out into the distance and strive to imagine the sort of world into which we were born. The search will continue. The urge is older than history. It is not satisfied, and it will not be suppressed. Edwin Hubble.
By the 1970s, astronomy was ready for its next leap in technology. The main limitation on all telescopes, even the Hale, was distortion introduced by the Earth's atmosphere. The very twinkling of the stars is caused by this unsteady air. The solution? Place an orbiting observatory high above the atmosphere. With a clear view of the stars, a space telescope would act as the eyes of the Earth. It could see to the very edge of the universe and the dawn of creation. What was soon named the Hubble Space Telescope grew into the most complex scientific instrument ever built. More than just a telescope, Hubble is actually a full-scale observatory, complete with cameras, computers, and a guidance system. Throughout the 1980s, over 10,000 people around the globe worked to create it. The European Space Agency built 2 giant solar arrays to power the craft, each panel containing 48,800 postage-sized solar cells. Computers in Connecticut and California monitored polishing of the 94-inch primary mirror. Hubble's operations ground system, its brain, consumed 12,000 man-years of computer programming. Although a hefty 13 tons, Hubble is actually the most fragile of machines. On April 24, 1990, the Space Shuttle Discovery, with Hubble aboard, counted down to liftoff. Around the world, astronomers crossed their fingers.
What you do is you build your telescope the best way you know how, and then you put it on top of a controlled explosion and hope that it'll make it to orbit all right. So for me, the biggest risk, and it was a nail-biting time during the launch, was that something drastic would go wrong.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery with the Hubble Space Telescope, our window on the universe.
When Hubble launched in April of 1990, it was a dream come true because many of us have worked on this program for decades, some even longer than my 20 years. And just seeing the shuttle going up there was just incredible high. But then the problem started.
NASA's plan called for the shuttle's long arm to lift Hubble into space, and everyone knew that this deployment was a period of maximum risk. Once in high orbit, the Discovery crew set about carefully freeing the $2 billion machine and its cargo bay.
Discovery, your go for umbilical disconnect.
The slightest mistake could imperil the telescope. As if that were not pressure enough, the astronauts were forced to operate under a tight deadline. Unless the solar arrays were up and running in time, Hubble would be no more.
We had to get those out and powered up because the batteries only had a charge for about 6 hours. And if those batteries ran down, the Hubble would have been dead. So once the shuttle released its own power system from the Hubble, we had to get those solar panels out in about 6 hours. So we're all frightened about that.
One of the solar panels stuck, delaying separation and costing precious time. As the clock ticked down, Discovery's crew prepared for an emergency spacewalk.
This is Mission Control Houston. Flight controllers here in Mission Control Center discussing an impending deadline.
The other thing I need an answer to is if I can go ahead and commit the EVA with the thought of going out and cranking it out. If whatever they're about to do fails, that they want us to just press on to back them up. We need to get on with it.
Okay, flight, I'll come back with the answer.
And I need answers now.
But we had the astronauts already getting their spacesuits on and getting ready for to go outside and do a spacewalk to hand crank them out just in case. And we got within 1 or 2 hours before power ran out when the solar panels finally came out.
Rendezvous, we're go. Fido, go. Eagle, go. Ecom, go. Inco, we're go. FAO,
go.
Max, go. PRS,
go flight.
EVA, we're go. So Capcom, we have a go for release. Discovery, go for Hubble release.
Spacecraft Hubble was free at last, orbiting 380 miles above its home world. Aboard the space shuttle, astronauts celebrated the moment by recalling the telescope's namesake.
We managed to obtain this device, which is the guiding eyepiece, we are assured, from the 100-inch telescope on which Edwin Hubble did many of his observations out at Mount Wilson in California. So it's his fundamental work, in fact.
The eyes of the Earth were ready to behold the origins of the Big Bang. Who could have thought that this dream come true would soon become astronomy's worst nightmare? Almost immediately, the solar panels caused problems. Every 45 minutes, Hubble moved from sunlight to darkness with an abrupt temperature shift of hundreds of degrees. The sharp temperature changes caused the arrays to contract or expand, shaking the delicate machine for several minutes. Hubble had a bad case of the jitters and no way to get rid of them. Tests over the next few weeks revealed an even more puzzling problem. Data from the 94-inch mirror simply didn't make sense. It seemed to indicate that the mirror could not focus. As the evidence mounted, no one was eager to confront the possibility of a major malfunction.
the primary contractor who had built the mirror and the telescope, and who was nominally in charge of helping to set up and align the optics, was saying in this period that there wasn't a problem. So I was on the one hand saying there was a problem. The official contractor on the other hand was saying there wasn't a problem.
And then all at once, the problem was too obvious to deny. A mistake in the primary mirror, an optical error 1/40th of the thickness of a human hair, had left Hubble seriously flawed. The astronomical community was devastated.
It was finally in late June that the final data came in, and we couldn't deny it. And it was just a crushing blow. I mean, I remember getting a call on a Sunday afternoon, and I was crushed.
The mirror disaster was immediately followed by a public relations fiasco. The press and public savaged NASA for its apparent hubris and incompetence. Coming just 4 years after the Space Shuttle Challenger tragedy, Hubble's plight made many wonder if NASA could do anything right. The summer of 1990 was filled with scathing editorials and brutal cartoons. The most complex scientific instrument ever built had become a national joke. Congress would reconvene in September amid fears that the lawmakers would simply let Hubble die.
If Congress had turned off the telescope that summer before we had a chance to fix it, it would have been a death blow to American astronomy. We would probably never get a chance, within our lifetime certainly, to build another large optical telescope. And for those 10,000 people that had spent decades on this program, it would have been a personal tragedy.
The impending tragedy threatened to consume everyone connected with it. As summer turned to fall in Washington, not only the Hubble telescope, but the future of NASA itself and America's space program hung in the balance. While the Hubble telescope orbits the Earth for a clearer view of the stars, an observatory for measuring the sun's nuclear reactions is buried 1 mile underground to protect it from other forms of radiation. As the wounded Hubble telescope circled the Earth, an investigation traced its imperfection to human error. Computers had warned of problems with the mirror, warnings unaccountably ignored by optical supervisors. By a strange twist of fate, yet another human miscalculation would rescue Hubble.
We were saved by Saddam Hussein. Before the invasion of Kuwait, there had been congressional and Senate hearings into it, and more promised in the fall. Well, then he invaded Kuwait, and I think that distracted the public opinion and gave us a window in which to fix the problem.
In theory, Hubble's nearsightedness could be corrected by replacing its camera with one equipped with compensating lenses. A nickel-sized piece of corrective glass might restore its full vision. A shuttle crew of 7 trained for nearly 2 years for the repair mission. They spent 400 hours in water tanks practicing maneuvering Hubble's refrigerator-sized components. But for Story Musgrave and his fellow astronauts, nothing mattered more than mental preparation.
It's choreographing a dance such that 5 days of activity out there, you know precisely what body motions you're going to take, how you're going to fit into things, where all the 300 tools are going to be throughout that 5 days. You simply build a script that you can now follow through out there in space.
When the shuttle Endeavour blasted off in a spectacular night launch in December 1993, it embarked on an extraordinarily complex and high-risk mission. 5 full nights of spacewalks were planned, by far the most ever. The astronauts were charged with attempting a dozen difficult tasks. Insiders would have been glad to see half the repairs performed successfully. All the while transmitting pictures back to spellbound Earthlings. Endeavour began by capturing Hubble on its long arm. The first order of business was replacing the troublesome solar arrays with new, temperature-resistant panels. When one of the old arrays refused to go quietly, it was unceremoniously ejected into space. Replacing the arrays had been built into Hubble's design and was a relatively simple procedure. However, no one had anticipated the need to replace the solar array drive electronics. That task would require exceptional patience.
I have a very bulky spacesuit that weighs about 500 pounds with me in it, and I'm riding on the end of a 60-foot arm, dealing with screws that are 3 millimeters and are non-captive. That task was excruciatingly painful. That was 3 hours of very, very hard work with 3 millimeter screws. And the reason being is because that job had not designed to be done by a spacewalker.
Day 3 marked the critical moment of the mission. To correct Hubble's vision, the primary camera would be replaced, and that meant removing the mirror's protective cover. Human hands would be moving large, unwieldy objects just 6 inches from the mirror's surface.
Even the slightest of touching on the Hubble surface, you are making dust which could end up on the optics. Every time you have to tie yourself down or some other instrument and you put a metal hook, metal to metal, you're worried about flaking, you're worried about scarring. We were very, very concerned about the threat that we were to Hubble.
When we got that camera in and they turned it on to make sure it was working, and it was working, that was a great, great, great relief. I think everything after that was sort of anticlimactic. Getting that camera in was the #1 priority, because that was the camera that was going to do all the science that we always promised.
The Endeavour repair mission succeeded beyond NASA's wildest dreams. Every one of the dozen planned tasks was carried out flawlessly. With its vision restored, Hubble allowed humans to see 10 times more clearly than ever before, the same jump in resolution as when Galileo first pointed his spyglass towards the sky. This photo of galaxy M100 was taken by Hubble in 1990. Here, the same region, viewed by the repaired telescope.
It's a very, very exciting time to be doing astronomy. And everybody has their favorite objects, which they have studied for many years. And when you finally get the opportunity to take a Hubble picture of those objects, you'll suddenly see things that you hadn't suspected. You'll see things that you'd long suspected but really wanted to prove. You know, you'll always learn something new.
Hubble has put some of astronomy's most treasured imaginings to the test.
What Hubble did was looked at the center of a galaxy where we suspected there might be a black hole. A black hole is an object that is very, very dense and very, very small. So dense and so tiny that the speed of escape from that object exceeds the speed of light. So nothing can get out of it. Everything just gets sucked into it and disappears from the universe. Black holes have been fantasy and science fiction for decades. And what Hubble has done now is it's shown us that black holes are scientific fact.
Hubble was made possible by the 10,000 humans who labored so long to conceive, build, and repair it. But even more, it is the direct descendant of those men whose thirst for knowledge would not be denied. Galileo sacrificing his freedom to put the sun at the center of our universe. George Hale overcoming his demons to build ever greater observatories. And Edwin Hubble guiding a telescope for 8 hours in a freezing dome to capture evidence of an expanding universe.
People really yearn to understand the stars, the universe, because that's where we came from. We are children of the stars in the sense that the chemical elements in our bodies were cooked in stars. The carbon, the calcium, all the good stuff in our bodies were cooked inside the nuclear furnaces of stars. And then those stars blew up and sent those chemicals all over the universe. And luckily, some of them collected here in the solar system.
Mankind has always been a race of stargazers. The tools change, the yearning remains the same, to know whence we came, Writing in 1902 at the dawn of our great age of astronomical discovery, H.G. Wells foresaw the adventure that lay ahead.
It is possible that all the human mind has ever accomplished is but the dream before the awakening. A day will come when beings who are now latent in our thoughts and hiding in our minds shall stand upon this earth as one stands upon a footstool, and shall laugh and reach out their hands amidst the stars.